It's Doom! The only video game series that's been pimped out more often than Sonic the Hedgehog. This fucking game had a rockin' killer soundtrack and lets you shoot motherfucking demons in the face! Alright, all kidding aside, id Games' follow-up to Wolfenstein 3D in 1993, Doom was clearly the end-all be-all of human existence when it came out. I remember being a PC gamer at the time, and it was clearly the equivalent to Call of Duty in the first-person shooter genre. It basically established all the rules, and for a long time in the 90s, shooters were known as Doom clones. We've even done a podcast about it. Anyway, as can be expected, it was ported to just about everything, and it's taken me forever to come up with this list, but I have finally collected all the versions of Doom, so let's take a look at them in their entirety. Alright, let's start with the 32X version. Frankly, the 32X version was the first port to come out on November 21st, 1998, a mere week before the Jaguar version. The irony of that is that the 32X is probably the weakest port of Doom, whereas the Jaguar is probably the strongest port of Doom. I mean, on the consoles of the time. But having said that, this version is completely compromised. It looks like shit, and even 32X purists want to claim that this is a playable version. Fuck that. There is no reason to own a 32X. There's definitely no reason to own Doom. And if you have the combination like I do here, I mean, you may as well just quit now. But anyway, if you want to know why, it's simply put that there's no way to play multiplayer. The screen is completely compromised and looks like shit, and as you see here. And more importantly, only 2 of the 3 episodes are there. Only 17 out of the 18 levels in the original are there. And it pretty much causes a ton of problems along the way. Weirdness, sure. You can use some cheats, you can pick a level other than level 1. When you beat the game, you get a DOS prompt and then the game crashes. Woo, that's the Easter egg. Anyway, maybe I'm lucky enough to show it to you here, but probably not because I'm feeling pretty lazy. But anyway, on top of that, the BFG 9000 isn't even playable because it does not pop up in the first 2 episodes. Now granted, you can use cheats because it did port the whole engine. So you can use cheats to use it, but frankly, it's just not available. As a result, also, the Cyber Demon and the Spider Mastermind, or the Spectre, they're not here. They don't show up. They are pretty much compromised out of most versions, actually, and this is no exception. On top of that, they took the Genesis YM2612, it's the Yamaha chip, and while it is capable of making some pretty cool sounds, I've proven that in my music episode, this is the best example of what I like to refer to as farty music. It sounds like a bunch of farts just going off at the same time and has absolutely no usable sound effects. In short, don't play this version, but I have taken the sacrifice because it is cheap, and if you own a 32X for any reason, I have a handful of reasons, you have this version. It's cheap, it comes with every version of the 32X, but fucking dodge it, and I'll show you why in a sec. Alright, so let's jump right into the Jaguar version. The biggest thing about this is it's one of the least compromised versions of Doom, and frankly, a lot of people consider it an enhanced port. I wouldn't go that far, but at the same time, it definitely offers more than, say, the 32X version, or we'll get to it later, but the SNES version. It's a direct port onto the 3DO, however, because it's CD media and the Jaguar is cartridge media, the load times and frame rate are much better. On top of that, it features 22 out of the PC version's 27 levels, although they stripped them down, and Tower of Babel and Hellkeep are completely rearranged levels. They don't even look like they do on the PC. However, this is the only version that occupies the full screen out of most of the console versions that came out in the mid-90s, and there are definitely plenty of lighting effects, although depth of field and various other 3D effects seem to be compromised. You could also use the JAG link to play 2-player deathmatch, which is kind of cool, although I'll give you $1 million if you can find me 2 people other than me and Derek who have a Jaguar, and there's no... so far, me and Derek have never found ourselves in the same fucking room with our Jaguars, so I think that kind of explains that. But anyway, basically, it lacks a couple of things because of the absence of certain levels. There's no Cyber Demon, there's no Spider Mastermind, and a Spectre are out. Not just because of the absence of levels, but also because it was stripped from certain levels that may have featured those. On top of that, the cool thing is that because it's a cartridge-based system and it does have memory saving, everything's saved automatically as you progress. So you can basically, like, quit the night on level, let's say you're knee-deep in the dead level 7. When you start back up, you can just pick that, and then, boom, you can jump right into that checkpoint. The other interesting thing is, obviously, because the Jaguar has those inserts, and I paid dearly for my version of Doom that has the inserts, you can pick, guns automatically. Maybe I've even shown this off somewhere in this video, but perhaps not. Either way, it's all down to the crazy buttons that are, Intellivision-style inserts. And at the end of the day, the only interesting thing about this is that, basically, it's got a really cool remixed version of the soundtrack, which I actually featured on the music episode, but you won't hear it during the main gameplay, or at least I don't believe you do. As far as I know, it's a pretty silent game when you're running around shooting demons. So I guess you'll see while I'm talking over this stuff, but there's the Jaguar version. Alright, now let's sit down and talk about the technical marvel that is the SNES version of Doom. It came out a decent amount of time later, September 1st, 1995, and actually only a couple months before the PlayStation port. However, frankly, in 1995, very few people had their hands on a PlayStation, so it wasn't that big of a deal. But one of the more notable features is that Randy Linden, he was the head programmer from Sculpted Software, who was responsible for the port onto the SNES, actually created an entire engine called the Reality Engine. He used a Super FX 2 chip, and is one of the biggest reasons why this game is very hard to emulate. And frankly, if you want to play it, just pony up the $20 for the red cart in America, the black or gray cart in Europe, or you can get any of those 3 in Australia from what I hear. Anyway, it's pretty much the same game as the Jaguar version. It has 22 out of the 27 levels. The interesting thing, though, is while it doesn't have the Spectre, it does have the Cyber Demon and the Spider Mastermind, which are not present in the rest of them. Much like the 32X version, though, you cannot, the demons can't, turn sideways. They've only got the front-facing, view, and much of the screen is compromised. But at the same time, it didn't require a $150 add-on, and it was a lot more faithful than the original, to the original. Ironically enough, though, because they wanted to make a traditional video game, a lot of the difficulties, like I'm Too Young to Die and Hey Not Too Rough difficulties, the easiest ones, cannot be played for episodes 2 or 3, and then episode 3 actually only lets you play on, I believe, Ultraviolence and Nightmare, unless you've played through the other ones at the medium difficulty. So basically you have to at least get through the medium difficulty, and you have to stay consistent. On the plus side, it takes advantage of the Super FX 2 chip by allowing a pretty dynamic map you can rotate and things like that, and it's a relatively impressive port, especially when you consider that the Super Nintendo was $100 at the time. But having said that, it's still not the greatest port in demand, but it definitely ranks up there if you need a quick and dirty port and want to play some Doom. The PlayStation version. Let's face it, it was the best version that ever came out for Doom. I know that, it seems a little crazy, but, in November 1995, if you had the $300 to spare, this was the definitive version of Doom that you'd been waiting for on consoles. While the SNES did create a great budget version, this was the most thorough and intense, content-heavy version that you could find. It was ported by Williams and definitely sold better than any of the other versions out there. I think it was more than 1 million copies. A couple of things they did that were a little different was Nightmare difficulty was not available, and your progress was still saved via passwords. So it seems that whole memory card system hadn't quite been worked out when they first developed the game. 23 of the levels from the PC version of Doom are available. They definitely follow, as all of them, the template of the Jaguar version, and all of the changes and ports and compromises are still there. However, unlike any of the other versions, it does have all of the bosses, and aside from the Archvile monster being removed from the Doom 2 levels, you pretty much have a feature-complete version of Doom 1 and most of Doom 2, actually. I'll get to that in a sec. One of the other things was, well, there was a frame rate issue, but it also has one of the few, like see-through versions of the Spectres, which is originally how they were intended to be seen. On top of that, if you had the PlayStation, what is it called? The serial I/O switch that allowed two PlayStations to play together. If you had a different, two different copies of the game, you could put those in and actually play some deathmatch. So that's kind of cool. But as a result, many of the things were compromised. You can clearly see here that some of the screen real estate is missing. But at the end of the day, it is a thorough version. Additionally, the original soundtrack by Bobby Prince is replaced by a new score by Aubrey Hodges. However, I think it's pretty faithful. And on top of all that, you do get some levels from Doom 2 and from Ultimate Doom. So, and when I say some levels, I do mean that 23 of the levels from Doom 2 and 5 of the levels from Ultimate Doom's 4th episode are in there. So it's a pretty feature-complete version. Now, you're going to run the gamut. You're going to probably pay on the upwards of about $30, which nowadays there are much cheaper ways to get your hands on not only Doom 1 and 2, but like the whole trilogy, including Final Doom and all that. It is also not the same thing as the Final Doom port. You have to actually look for the Doom port on PlayStation. But having said that, yeah, it's a pretty awesome version of Doom. If you gotta play Doom, if you want to play Doom on consoles and you don't have anything else to go for, PlayStation's $20, the game's $30, you can start a collection pretty easily. Again, I had to hunt pretty far and wide for this version, and I gotta say, it was worth the hunt because it's probably the best version I'm going to talk about today. Oh, the 3DO version. In a true metaphor for the console itself, this late-to-the-party port by Art Data with some assistance from Logicware came out in 1996 and was basically a 2 years late version of the Atari Jaguar version. Now, granted, it did autosave instead of using passwords, but at the same time, the game had like a very small postage stamp style of visual real estate on the screen. On top of that, it ran at a shit frame rate, and in order to speed up that frame rate, you could shrink the screen even more and make it even harder to see. It's got all the compromises from the Jaguar version. It's got all the problems, and frankly, it was supposed to be a perfect PC port, but of course, it ended up in development hell, and from 1994 to 1996, no one knew if it was even fucking coming out. And then out of nowhere, of course, it was contracted out, I'm guessing probably by this Logicware team, and was ported in 10 weeks. Good for you, 3DO. That's a perfect way to handle all of your games, because that's exactly what you did, and why this $700 system fucking failed. Oh, the Saturn port, proving that last is not necessarily worst, but I don't know, there's something disorienting about playing this version that just doesn't quite feel right. Now, granted, this GT Interactive and Rage Software port in 1997 was okay. It was basically a port of the PlayStation version, which I can get behind. Naturally, I said very many positive things about it. Unfortunately, the frame rate is like half, so you basically feel like your brain and your controls are ahead of what's going on the fucking screen. In fact, if I don't strafe sideways by accident, I think I'll be okay. There's actually a mouse for the Saturn, and it's cool, but much like my Wolfenstein video, it's completely pointless on the Saturn version because half the controls are still needed through the controller. So why would you want a mouse in one hand and a controller kind of sideways in another? It's not like it's the fucking PlayStation Move. Anyway, again, it's okay. It's a decent version if you happen to have the Saturn and need a port. But frankly, there are so many options out there right now, I can't see why you'd do it today. But at the time, you know what? It was like the Me Too mentality that Sega wanted to get behind. And, hey, if you're going to get behind a port that's going to be really late to the party like this one was, it's best to copy the PlayStation version and do the best you can. And they did just that. So, you know, I'm going to give them a fraction of credit, but at the same time, I wouldn't pick up the Saturn version if I were you. As you can see here, it's not quite what you want. Alright, you getting sick of Doom's first level? Imagine how sick of it I am watching it so many times trying to edit this video. But hey, fuck it. Anyway, let's wrap up with the Game Boy Advance version. So this version, as you can see, is doing okay. Now, I've blown it up on a big screen through the GameCube adapter, but for the most part, this was Doom on a portable console, and you'd really never seen it anywhere else, and proving yet again that the Game Boy Advance is a fantastic system. Now, as much as you may think this is a port of the SNES version, believe it or not, this is a direct port of the Jaguar version, which is why, you know, it's almost PC feature complete. A couple of the compromises are made. Again, you see them in the Jaguar version. But you know, multiplayer is available, and actually, ironically, one of the most significant differences to the rest of the versions is that this is heavily censored. Now, of course, Nintendo, not huge on violence, although the Doom port was perfectly violence-heavy. You know, they went back to their roots with Wolfenstein and whatnot, and censored the hell out of this. All the blood's green, bodies disappear, and basically it's a stripped-down version. On the plus side, it did get a teen rating, so I guess if you were 14 in 2001 when you wanted to play this game, this was the only version you could play, you know, if you still cared about Doom. Although I would argue that nowadays it probably deserves a teen rating across the board. But hey. Anyway, after this, there were a couple ports. There was a 360 and a PS3 and a PC version on the BFG edition, and Doom 3 on the original Xbox, the Collector's Edition, which is the more widespread version of the game. It's got the steel casing. It's also a pretty PC-perfect version of the game. So, there's about 1 million ways to get these games nowadays, but you know, for $5 it's probably the best way to do it. But just in case, here's the old console versions. Now you know. And without further ado, go to gaminghistory101.com to see this and many other things. Sorry for my language in this version, but it seemed only appropriate with Doom. And be sure to check out future versions of Version in the future. Peace out. And then the game crashes. Woo, that's the Easter egg. Anyway, maybe I'm lucky enough to show it to you here, but probably not because I'm feeling pretty lazy. But anyway, on top of that, the BFG 9000 isn't even playable because it does not pop up in the first 2 episodes. Now granted, you can use cheats because it did port the whole engine. So you can use cheats to use it, but, you know, frankly, it's just not available. As a result, also, the Cyber Demon and the Spider Mastermind or the Spectre, they're not here. They don't show up. They are pretty much compromised out of It's Doom! The only video game series that's been pimped out more often than Sonic the Hedgehog. This fucking game had a rockin' killer soundtrack and lets you shoot motherfucking demons in the face! Alright, all kidding aside, id Games' follow-up to... Alright, let's start with the 32X version. Frankly, the 32X version was the first port to come out on November 21st, 1998, a mere week before the Jaguar version. The irony of that is that the 32X is probably the weakest port of Doom, whereas the Jaguar is probably the strongest port of Doom. I mean, on the consoles of the time. But having said that, this version is completely compromised. It looks like shit, and even 32X purists want to claim that this is a playable version. Fuck that. There is no reason to own a 32X. There's definitely no reason to own Doom. And if you have the combination like I do here, I mean, you may as well just... you know, just quit now. But anyway, if you want to know why, it's simply put that there's no way to play multiplayer. The screen is completely compromised and looks like shit, and as you see here. And more importantly, only 2 of the 3 episodes are there. Only 17 out of the 18 levels in the original are there. And it pretty much causes a ton of problems along the way. Weirdness, sure. You can use some cheats, you can pick a level other than level 1. When you beat the game, you get a DOS prompt. Wolfenstein 3D in 1993. Doom was clearly the end-all be-all of human existence when it came out. I remember being a PC gamer at the time, and it was clearly the equivalent to Call of Duty in the first-person shooter genre. It basically established all the rules, and for a long time in the 90s, shooters were known as Doom clones. We've even done a podcast about it. Anyway, as can be expected, it was ported to just about everything, and it's taken me forever to come up with this list, but I have finally collected all the versions of Doom, so let's take a look at them in their entirety.